The chime of expensive crystal clinked through the private dining room of Bellini's, the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. Jackson Pierce barely registered the sound, his gaze fixed on the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. At 42, with salt-and-pepper hair and piercing blue eyes that had graced the cover of Forbes 3 times, Jackson had everything money could buy, and nothing that truly mattered. "To another successful quarter," said Thomas Wright, raising his glass. The other executives around the table followed suit, their eager smiles reflecting the bonus checks they'd received earlier that day. Pierce Capital had just closed a $4.8 billion acquisition, cementing Jackson's reputation as the shrewdest investor on Wall Street. Jackson lifted his glass mechanically, the 18-year-old Scotch tasting like nothing on his tongue. He'd been through this ritual hundreds of times. The deals, the celebrations, the obligatory dates with socialites and models that inevitably followed, all of it had begun to blur together in a monotonous haze of wealth without purpose. "You've outdone yourself, Jackson," said Vanessa Keller, the head of legal, leaning closer than necessary. Her perfume was expensive, her intentions transparent. 3 months ago, he might have taken the bait, invited her to his penthouse for a nightcap. Tonight, the thought exhausted him. "The team deserves the credit," he replied, his voice neutral enough to discourage further advances without causing offense. Vanessa's smile faltered briefly before she recovered, turning her attention to the CFO instead. The restaurant's owner, Giovanni Bellini, approached their table, all Italian charm and practiced deference. "Mr. Pierce, is everything to your satisfaction? Perhaps you'd like to see our special wine selection. I have a 1982 Bordeaux that just arrived." "Everything's fine, Giovanni, thank you." Jackson cut him off with practiced politeness. More luxury, more exclusivity, the last things he needed. "Very good, sir. Your server will be with you shortly. We have someone new tonight. One of our best." Jackson nodded absently, returning to the conversation around him. His executives were already planning the next acquisition, their appetites insatiable. He checked his watch. Barely 9 p.m. The night stretched before him like an endless desert. "Sorry for the wait, gentlemen and lady." The voice came from behind him, warm, confident, with a hint of something Jackson couldn't place. Not the practiced smoothness of Bellini's usual staff, but something more authentic. He turned and found himself looking into the most remarkable pair of hazel eyes he'd ever seen. "I'm Abby," said the waitress, her smile genuine in a way that startled him. She was striking rather than conventionally beautiful. Early 30s, chestnut hair pulled back in a simple knot, no makeup beyond a touch of lip gloss. She wore the standard Bellini's uniform, but somehow made it look like a choice rather than a requirement. "I'll be taking care of you tonight. May I tell you about our specials?" As she described the chef's creations, Jackson found himself actually listening. She spoke about food with unexpected passion, describing flavors and textures as if they mattered. No fawning, no special deference to him, despite undoubtedly knowing who he was. Just professional warmth and a curious spark of intelligence in those remarkable eyes. "The risotto sounds perfect," he said when she'd finished, surprising his colleagues who expected him to order his usual steak. "Excellent choice," she replied, and for a moment their eyes held. Something passed between them, a flash of recognition, perhaps, though they'd never met before. Then she moved on, taking the others' orders with the same attentive care. As she walked away, Jackson realized he was staring, and quickly turned back to the conversation. But for the first time in months, he felt a flicker of genuine interest. Throughout dinner, he found himself tracking Abby's movements around the room. There was something different about her, an independence of spirit that stood out in a place where everyone catered to wealth and power. When she brought his risotto, their fingers brushed briefly, and Jackson felt an unexpected jolt of electricity. "How is everything?" she asked later, and he realized he'd actually tasted his food for once. "It's exceptional," he replied truthfully. "I told the chef you ordered it. He was surprised, said you're usually a steak man." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "You discussed me with the chef?" "Just professional curiosity," she replied with a slight smile. "We notice patterns. It's part of good service." As the evening progressed, Jackson participated more in the conversation around him, aware that Abby was watching too, forming her own impressions. When she brought the check, he signed it without looking at the total, adding a tip larger than most people's monthly salary. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce," she said professionally when she returned with his card. "I hope you enjoyed your evening." "I did," he said, meaning it for once. "Will you be working tomorrow night?" Something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps wariness. "I'm afraid not. I only fill in occasionally. I have another job." Before he could respond, Thomas engaged him in a question about tomorrow's board meeting, and the moment passed. When Jackson looked up again, Abby had disappeared. As the group prepared to leave, Giovanni approached. "Mr. Pierce, was everything satisfactory?" "Yes. Your new server, Abby. She's excellent." Giovanni looked confused. "Abby? Oh, you mean Abigail?" "Yes, quite competent. Though, as I mentioned, she's temporary, a last-minute replacement. She's actually a teacher, I believe." A teacher. The information surprised Jackson, making him even more curious. He walked out into the cool October air, declining invitations for drinks at the usual club. For the first time in recent memory, he'd met someone who intrigued him, and now she was gone. He would probably never see her again. The thought bothered him more than it should have. 3 days later, Jackson was stuck in midtown traffic when he spotted a familiar figure hurrying down the sidewalk, arms full of what appeared to be art supplies. Without thinking, he called to his driver. "Pull over." He stepped out of the car, ignoring the startled looks from pedestrians recognizing the billionaire in their midst. "Abby!" he called. She turned, confusion crossing her features before recognition dawned. "Mr. Pierce," she said, shifting her awkward bundle. "Jackson," he corrected, suddenly feeling uncharacteristically uncertain. "Need some help with those?" "I'm fine, thanks," she replied, though one precariously balanced canvas threatened to topple from her stack. "Just running late for my class. At least let me give you a ride," he offered, gesturing to the waiting Bentley. She hesitated, clearly weighing her options. "That's very kind, but—" "Please," he said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "Consider it a thank you for the best risotto recommendation I've ever had." A smile tugged at her lips. "Well, when you put it that way, but I'm going to Brooklyn." "Not a problem," Jackson replied, already relieving her of half her supplies. As the car glided through traffic, crossing the bridge into a part of New York Jackson rarely visited, neither could have predicted how this chance second meeting would change both their lives forever. "Art teacher by day, waitress by night?" Jackson asked as the Bentley navigated through Brooklyn's crowded streets. Abby smiled, but there was a hint of defensiveness in her posture. "Only occasionally waitressing. I teach art at Horizon Academy in Williamsburg. It's a public school focused on the arts." "And the restaurant gig?" "New York rent isn't kind to teachers' salaries," she said matter-of-factly. "I pick up shifts at Bellini's when they need someone." "Giovanni's cousin was my student years ago." Jackson nodded, suddenly aware of the gulf between their worlds. His watch cost more than she likely made in a year. "I admire that. The dedication." She studied him with those perceptive hazel eyes. "Do you?" "Most people just think it's sad." The car slowed in front of a converted warehouse with colorful murals decorating its exterior. A sign read, "Williamsburg Community Arts Center." "This isn't a school," Jackson observed. "After-hours program," Abby explained, gathering her supplies. "I teach adults here twice a week, people who work during the day but still want to create." Something about her passion made Jackson blurt out, "Could I see?" Surprise flashed across Abby's face. "You want to see my class?" "If that's not inappropriate," she considered him for a moment. "Actually, we could use a model." "A model?" Jackson repeated, suddenly uncomfortable. Abby laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Not that kind. Just someone for the portrait session. Usually I have to sit there myself while trying to give instructions." She checked her watch. "Class starts in 10 minutes. Yes or no, Mr. Billionaire?" The challenge in her voice made the decision for him. "Yes." Inside, the space was nothing like the sleek galleries Jackson frequented. Paint-splattered tables formed a semicircle around a simple chair. Canvases in various stages of completion lined the walls. The smell of turpentine and possibility filled the air. Abby introduced him simply as Jackson, today's portrait subject, offering no hint of his status. The class, a diverse group ranging from 20-somethings to retirees, barely gave him a second glance as they set up their easels. For 2 hours, Jackson sat quietly, watching Abby transform. In this space, she was confident, authoritative, moving from student to student with encouraging words and gentle corrections. Nothing like the deferential server at Bellini's. This, he realized, was the real Abigail. "Remember, you're not just capturing features," she told the class. "You're looking for the essence. What makes this face uniquely human? The irony wasn't lost on Jackson. For years, people had looked at him and seen only money, power, status, never the person beneath. Now, strangers were studying him more carefully than anyone had in years. When the class ended, students thanked him before filtering out, several lingering to ask Abby questions. Jackson waited patiently, finding himself in no hurry to return to his penthouse. "Sorry about that," Abby said, approaching him once the last student had left. "Thanks for being such a good sport." "It was illuminating," Jackson admitted. "Do I get to see the results?" "Most first sessions aren't exactly flattering," she warned, but led him around to view the various interpretations. Some were rudimentary, others surprisingly skilled. All showed aspects of himself he'd never considered. "This one's interesting," he said, stopping before a canvas that captured a certain melancholy in his eyes. "That's Elaine's. She was a psychologist before retiring." Abby studied the portrait. "She sees more than most." An awkward silence fell between them. Jackson broke it first. "Would you have dinner with me?" Abby raised her eyebrows. "Tonight. It's almost 10. I know a place that's always open for me." The moment the words left his mouth, Jackson regretted them. It sounded exactly like the entitled billionaire he was trying not to be. Abby's expression confirmed it. "I'm sure you do," she said coolly, "but I have papers to grade and an early class tomorrow." "Another time, then," he persisted, surprised by his own eagerness. She hesitated. "Why?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. "Why what? Why dinner? Why me? You're Jackson Pierce. You could have dinner with literally anyone." "That's exactly why," he said, the truth coming more easily than expected. "Most people want something from me. You don't seem to." Her expression softened slightly. "That's a pretty low bar." "You'd be surprised." He reached for his phone. "Give me your number. I'll call you." Instead of complying, Abby picked up a blank business card from a stack on her desk and wrote something on it. "My email," she said, handing it to him. "If you're still interested in a regular person dinner next week, let me know." It was a gentle rebuff. She was maintaining boundaries, and Jackson respected it, even as it frustrated him. He wasn't used to working for people's attention. "I'll email you tomorrow," he promised. The next morning, sitting in his office overlooking Central Park, Jackson stared at the blank email screen. How long had it been since he'd actually pursued a woman? Years, probably. They usually came to him drawn by his wealth and influence. The few who weren't were typically looking to make strategic connections. Dating had become transactional, another kind of business deal. He finally typed, "Dinner next Friday, you choose the place, is JP. Her reply came hours later. "I teach until 6. There's a Thai place near the school. Nothing fancy but good food. 7 p.m. Jackson smiled at his screen. No fancy restaurant, no attempt to impress him or leverage the invitation, just dinner. Friday found him dismissing his driver and taking a cab to Williamsburg, dressed in the most casual clothes he owned, which, he realized too late, still looked expensive. The restaurant, Siam Garden, was small and crowded, with plastic tablecloths and faded photographs of Bangkok on the walls. Abby was already there, wearing jeans and a simple blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders. Something tightened in Jackson's chest at the sight of her, relaxed, authentic, beautiful without trying to be. "You found it," she said, looking mildly surprised. "I do occasionally venture beyond Manhattan," he replied, sliding into the seat across from her. The waitress recognized Abby and greeted her warmly before taking their orders. Jackson followed Abby's recommendations, and soon the table was filled with dishes he'd never tried before. "So," she said, expertly wielding chopsticks, "what does a billionaire do all day?" The question was asked lightly, but Jackson sensed genuine curiosity behind it. He found himself talking about his work with unexpected honesty, the challenges, the responsibilities, the emptiness that had crept in recently. "I started with nothing," he told her. "Scholarship kid at Wharton, slept on friends' couches while starting my first fund. I was hungry then, not just for success, but to prove something." "And now you've proven it," Abby observed. "Now I'm just going through the motions," he admitted, surprised by his own candor. "Hence your boredom at Bellini's. Was it that obvious?" To someone paying attention, she took a sip of her beer. "So what would make you feel alive again?" The question hit him like a physical force. No one had asked him anything so fundamental in years. Before he could answer, a commotion at the door drew their attention. A group of teenagers burst in, loud and exuberant. One spotted Abby and bounded over. "Ms. Matthews, you've got to see this." The boy, about 16 with multiple piercings, thrust his phone toward her. On the screen was a detailed digital artwork. "Miguel, this is incredible," Abby said, examining the image. "The perspective is perfect." The boy beamed. "I used that technique you showed me, been practicing every night. It shows. I'm so proud of you." Miguel finally noticed Jackson, curiosity written across his face. "Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt your date." "It's not," Abby began. "It's fine," Jackson interjected, extending his hand. "I'm Jackson, friend of Ms. Matthews." The boy shook his hand. "Miguel, future famous artist according to Ms. M." "He really could be," Abby said proudly. "Miguel won the citywide digital arts competition last year." After a few more minutes of conversation, the boy rejoined his friends. Jackson watched the interaction with fascination. "You really care about them." "Of course," Abby replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Sometimes I'm the only one who believes in their potential." Something shifted in Jackson's perspective, like a camera lens suddenly coming into focus. Here was a woman who measured success not in billions, but in the light that came into a teenager's eyes when someone believed in him. As the evening progressed, Abby shared more about her own journey, growing up in a small Pennsylvania town, coming to New York with dreams of being an artist, finding her calling in teaching instead. "I still paint," she said, "but helping others find their creative voice, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning." When the check came, she insisted on splitting it. Jackson wanted to argue, but recognized the importance of the gesture to her. Outside the restaurant, the autumn night was cool and clear. They walked slowly toward the subway, conversation flowing easily between them. "I'd like to see you again," Jackson said when they reached the station. Abby looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because I live in this world," she gestured to the neighborhood around them, "and you live in a different one entirely. What could possibly come of it?" Before he could answer, her phone rang. She checked the screen, her expression immediately changing to concern. "I need to take this," she said, stepping away. Jackson watched as her face grew increasingly worried. When she returned, her earlier warmth had vanished. "I have to go," she said. "Family emergency." "Can I help? My car could—" "No," she cut him off firmly. "Thank you for dinner, Jackson. It was nice meeting you." She was gone before he could respond, disappearing into the subway entrance, leaving Jackson with the unsettling feeling that he'd just lost something important before it had even begun. What he couldn't have known was that the phone call would lead to a secret Abby had been keeping, one that would challenge everything between them when they next met. 3 weeks passed without a word from Abby. Jackson had emailed twice, once to ask if everything was all right after her abrupt departure, and again a week later with a more casual invitation to an art exhibition. Both messages went unanswered. He told himself to move on. Women didn't usually ignore Jackson Pierce, but Abby Matthews clearly wasn't usual. There was a certain irony that the first woman who genuinely interested him in years was also the first to reject him outright. "You're distracted," remarked Caroline Huntington, his company's head of philanthropy, during their weekly meeting. "The Jackson Pierce I know doesn't miss financial projections." Jackson refocused on the spreadsheets before him. The Pierce Foundation was planning its annual charity gala, typically a networking event disguised as altruism. "Sorry, what were the final numbers for last year?" Caroline eyed him curiously, but continued her presentation. When she finished, instead of dismissing her, Jackson asked, "What do we actually accomplish with these donations?" She blinked, surprised by the question. "Well, they go to various causes: education, healthcare, the arts, the usual suspects." "But what changes? What improves?" Jackson pressed. "Do we track impact or just write checks and feel good about ourselves?" Caroline shifted uncomfortably. "We require annual reports from recipients, but honestly, most of our donors care more about the tax benefits than the outcomes." The answer disgusted him, though he recognized the truth in it. He'd been the same way for years. "I want to change that," he decided suddenly, "starting with education grants. Find me programs that are actually transforming lives, not just padding resumes." After Caroline left, Jackson sat at his desk, turning over this new dissatisfaction. Abby's influence, he realized. She'd made him see the emptiness of his philanthropy, symbolic gestures that changed nothing fundamental. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Pierce, there's an Abigail Matthews here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment." Jackson's heart jumped. "Send her in." When Abby walked through his office door, he immediately sensed something was wrong. She looked exhausted, her usual confident posture replaced by evident tension. "I wasn't sure you'd see me," she said. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk but remained standing himself. "What happened?" "My brother," she said simply. "The call that night was from the hospital. He overdosed." "I'm sorry," Jackson said, genuine concern replacing his initial hurt. "Is he all right?" "Physically, yes, but he needs help, real help. He's been struggling with addiction for years." She took a deep breath. "The reason I'm here, this is humiliating, but I need money." The statement hung between them. Jackson felt a stab of disappointment, wondering if he'd misjudged her completely. "Not for me," Abby added quickly, as if reading his thoughts. "For his treatment. There's a facility in Vermont, one of the best for long-term recovery. They have a spot for him, but it costs $45,000 for the 3-month program. My insurance won't cover it, and I've already maxed out my credit cards getting him through detox." "And you came to me," Jackson said, his tone carefully neutral. Abby's cheeks flushed. "I tried everything else first, believe me. This was my last resort." She pulled a folder from her bag and placed it on his desk. "I brought this. It's a promissory note. I've worked out a payment plan. It'll take me 7 years, but I'll pay back every cent with interest." Jackson didn't touch the folder. "Why not just ask for my help as a friend?" "Are we friends?" Abby challenged. "We had one dinner, and in my experience, money changes everything." She stood straighter. "I don't want charity, Jackson. I'm asking for a loan." Her dignity touched him. Most people who wanted his money didn't offer contracts. They offered flattery, entertainment, companionship. They certainly didn't look him in the eye with such fierce independence. "What's your brother's name?" he asked. "Daniel. He's 34. An architect, a brilliant one, when he's sober." Jackson walked to the window, considering. "I'll cover the treatment," he said finally. "As a proper loan with terms." He turned back to her. "But I have conditions." Wariness crept into her expression. "What conditions?" "I want to meet Daniel, and I want you to help me with something in return." "I'm not going to sleep with you for money if that's where this is going," Abby said bluntly. "That's not—" Jackson stopped, genuinely offended. "I would never suggest that, ever." The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. "Then what?" "The Pierce Foundation gives millions to education initiatives, but I've realized we have no idea if we're making any real difference. I want you to help me redesign our approach. Find programs that actually work, that transform lives like you do with your students." Surprise replaced suspicion on Abby's face. "You're serious?" "Completely. 3 hours a week. Paid consultant rate. Your insight for my funding. Your brother's treatment will be handled separately, as a proper loan between us." Abby studied him, clearly weighing the proposal. "Why not just have your staff research effective programs?" "Because they think like I used to, in terms of metrics and prestige and connections. You think about impact, about people." He stepped closer. "The night we had dinner, your student looked at you like you'd changed his life. That's what I want our foundation to do." Something in her expression softened. "All right, but I want everything in writing, both agreements." "Of course." He picked up his phone. "I'll have legal draw up the papers today. Now, when can I meet your brother?" The meeting with Daniel Matthews took place the following day at a private treatment center in Manhattan. The resemblance between siblings was striking. The same expressive eyes, though Daniel's were clouded by shame and chemical aftermath. "I don't need your charity," were his first words to Jackson. "It's not charity," Jackson replied evenly. "It's an investment in your recovery. Your sister believes in you. That's good enough for me." As they discussed the Vermont facility, Jackson was struck by the man's intelligence and insight, even in his damaged state. He recognized something of himself in Daniel. The same drive for perfection, the same unforgiving standards. In another life, they might have been friends or colleagues. After the meeting, as Jackson walked Abby to a cab, she said quietly, "Thank you, not just for the money, but for treating him with respect. He deserves respect, and a chance to rebuild." Jackson hesitated. "The real reason I wanted to meet him was to understand you better. Family shapes us." Abby's expression was unreadable. "Yes, it does." Over the following weeks, as Daniel began treatment in Vermont, Abby started working with the Pierce Foundation. Their weekly meetings quickly became the highlight of Jackson's schedule. She challenged his assumptions, pushed back against conventional philanthropy, and introduced him to educators doing remarkable work in overlooked communities. "These are the programs we should be funding," she said during one passionate presentation, "not the flashy pilot projects that look good in annual reports, but disappear after the cameras leave." Her conviction was contagious. Jackson found himself reimagining his entire approach to giving. He visited schools in neighborhoods he'd previously only seen from his car window, meeting students whose potential was being squandered by systemic neglect. As they worked together, the tension between them evolved into something more complex. Jackson felt himself drawn to her not just romantically, but intellectually. She made him question his values, his purpose. And occasionally, when they worked late into the evening, he caught her looking at him with an expression that suggested she might be feeling something similar. 6 weeks into their arrangement, Jackson received a call from the Vermont facility. Daniel Matthews had left against medical advice in the middle of the night. No one knew where he'd gone. When Jackson arrived at Abby's apartment, a 5th-floor walk-up in Bushwick, he found her frantically making calls. "Any word?" he asked after she ended another unsuccessful attempt. She shook her head, fear evident in her eyes. "This is what he does. Starts to get better, then sabotages himself. But this time—" She didn't finish the thought. "We'll find him," Jackson promised. He made some calls of his own, engaging a private security firm he used for corporate matters. "They'll start looking immediately. Meanwhile, is there anywhere he might go? Friends? Places that were significant to him?" Abby paced the small living room. "He always loved the High Line. We used to go there when he first moved to the city." She grabbed her coat. "I need to look for him myself." "I'm coming with you," Jackson said firmly. They spent hours searching, first the High Line, then Daniel's old neighborhood in Chelsea. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and Jackson's concern deepened. A recovering addict, alone in the city with access to every temptation, the scenario was dangerous at best, potentially fatal at worst. Around midnight, exhausted and discouraged, they stopped at an all-night diner. Abby stared into her untouched coffee, fear etched into the lines of her face. "He's done this before," she said softly. "Disappeared. The longest was 3 weeks. When he finally called, he was in Atlantic City, broke and strung out." Jackson reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "This time is different. He has us looking for him." "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "The loan, I understand. But this, spending your night searching for my addict brother?" The question caught him off guard. Why indeed? It wasn't obligation or even simple attraction. Somewhere in the past weeks, Abby and her struggles had become important to him in a way nothing had been for years. "Because I care," he said simply. "About you, about what happens to your family." Something shifted in her expression, a softening, a vulnerability she rarely showed. For a moment, it seemed she might say something significant. Then her phone rang. It was the security team. They'd found Daniel at a bar in the East Village, intoxicated but physically unharmed. When they arrived, Daniel was sitting at the bar, staring into an empty glass. He looked up as they approached, his expression a mix of defiance and shame. "Come to drag me back to rehab," he slurred. "We came to make sure you're safe," Abby replied, relief and disappointment warring in her voice. "I don't need saving," Daniel insisted, "especially not by your rich boyfriend." "This isn't about money, Daniel," Jackson said calmly. "It's about your sister caring whether you live or die." "Why do you care?" Daniel challenged, swaying slightly on the bar stool. "What's your angle?" Before Jackson could answer, Abby intervened. "That's enough. We're taking you home." Outside, as they waited for the car Jackson had summoned, Daniel's belligerence faded into misery. "I can't do it, Abs. I can't fix myself." "Yes, you can," she insisted. "But you have to want it. Not for me, for yourself." "What if I'm not worth fixing?" The rawness of the question silenced them all. Jackson, watching the siblings, recognized the dark thought. He'd had versions of it himself during his lowest moments, not about addiction, but about purpose, about deserving the success he'd achieved. When the car arrived, they helped Daniel into the back seat. Jackson was about to follow when Abby pulled him aside. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Something I should have told you before you got involved with my family." The streetlight cast half her face in shadow, but Jackson could see the conflict in her eyes. "What is it?" It's about my past, about why I understand addiction so well. She took a deep breath. I wasn't always an art teacher. A commotion from the car interrupted her. Daniel had opened the door and was attempting to get out. As they rushed to stop him, the moment was lost. Later, after they'd settled Daniel in Abby's apartment with a security guard posted outside, Jackson prepared to leave. "What were you going to tell me earlier?" he asked. Abby looked exhausted, the night's events weighing heavily on her. "It can wait. I need to focus on Daniel right now. I understand." He hesitated at the door. "Whatever it is, Abby, it won't change how I feel about you." She looked up at him, surprise and something like hope flickering across her face. "And how do you feel about me, Jackson Pierce?" It was a direct challenge typical of her. No games, no pretense. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he admitted, the words surprising him as much as her, "and it terrifies me." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Then Daniel called from the other room, breaking the spell. "You should go," Abby said softly. "We'll talk soon." As Jackson rode home in his car, gazing at the city lights, he wondered if he'd made a mistake in revealing his feelings. But the truth had come too easily to be denied. Somehow, this complicated, principled woman had broken through barriers he'd spent years constructing. What he didn't know was that Abby was sitting in her darkened apartment, looking at an old photograph hidden in her desk drawer, a photograph that connected her to Jackson in a way neither of them yet realized, a connection that would either bring them together or drive them irrevocably apart. The morning after finding Daniel, Jackson awoke to an email from Abby. "Need time to deal with my brother. Will be taking him back to Vermont myself. Please don't contact me for a few days. I'll reach out when I'm ready to talk." Merci. Jackson respected her request, throwing himself into work to distract from the constant urge to call her. He accelerated the Foundation's reorganization, implementing many of Abby's suggestions despite her absence. When the board questioned the shift in focus, he defended the new approach with a conviction that surprised even himself. "We've been chasing prestige instead of impact," he told them. "That changes now." A week passed with no word from Abby. Then two. Jackson found himself driving past her school, contemplating accidentally running into her before recognizing how inappropriate that would be. He'd told her he was falling in love with her. Perhaps that admission had pushed her away for good. Finally, on the 16th day of silence, his assistant announced, "Ms. Matthews is here to see you." Jackson tried to appear composed as Abby entered his office. She looked better than the last time he'd seen her. Rested, resolute, though tension still lined her face. "Daniel's back in treatment," she said without preamble. "A different facility in Vermont. They're taking a more comprehensive approach." "I'm glad," Jackson replied, unsure where they stood. "And you? How are you?" "Managing." She crossed to the window, gazing out at the city below. "I've been thinking about what you said the night we found Daniel." Jackson's heart quickened. "And? And before I can respond, there's something you need to know." She turned to face him. "Something I've been trying to tell you." The seriousness in her voice alarmed him. "Whatever it is, we can work through it." Abby shook her head. "Don't make promises before you know what you're promising." She took a deep breath. "Do you remember Carter Investments?" The question caught him off guard. Carter Investments had been one of his first major acquisitions 12 years ago, a mid-sized firm he'd purchased and dismantled, selling off the valuable parts and discarding the rest. Of course, why? "My father worked there, Robert Matthews. He was a portfolio manager." Jackson searched his memory. The name was vaguely familiar from the personnel files, but he'd never met the man personally. "When you acquired the company," Abby continued, "you restructured, cut the redundant positions. My father was let go after 22 years. Understanding began to dawn." "Abby, corporate acquisitions always involve difficult personnel decisions." "I know how business works," she interrupted, "but you don't know what happened after. Dad was 53, overqualified for entry-level positions, underqualified for executive roles in a changing industry. He couldn't find work." She walked closer, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "He started drinking. Then came depression, then losing our house. Mom left, couldn't handle it. Daniel and I tried to hold things together. The pieces were falling into place. Your father killed himself 3 years after losing his job. Put a gun in his mouth in our garage." Her words were clinical, but Jackson could see the old pain beneath them. Daniel found him. That's when his addiction started. Jackson felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath him. I had no idea. Why would you? He was just a name on a spreadsheet, collateral damage in a profitable deal. Her eyes held his, not accusatory, but unflinching. I recognized your name the moment you sat at my table at Bellini's. I've known who you were from the beginning. The revelation stunned him. Why didn't you say something? At first I wanted to see the man who'd changed our lives without even knowing we existed. Then, things got complicated. I started to see you as a person, not just the billionaire who broke my family. Is that why you disappeared after our dinner? Because of who I am? Abby shook her head. No, that really was about Daniel, but I couldn't take your money or get involved with you without telling you the truth. Jackson moved to the small bar in the corner of his office, pouring water with unsteady hands. His mind raced through implications. The foundation work, the loan for Daniel, was it all about making me pay for what happened to your father? No, Abby said firmly. The foundation work was genuine. I believe in what we're doing, and I needed help with Daniel. That was real too. She paused. But I can't deny that there's a certain justice in you helping to heal what your actions helped break. Jackson turned back to her, searching her face. And us? What was that? For the first time, her composure wavered. That's the complication. I never expected to feel anything for you. I certainly never planned to fall in— She stopped herself. To care about you. The unfinished sentiment hung between them. Jackson wanted to close the distance, to take her in his arms, but the weight of their shared history held him back. I understand if this changes everything, Abby said quietly. If you want to rescind the loan, I've made other arrangements for Daniel's treatment, and I'll resign from the foundation consulting immediately. No, Jackson said firmly. The loan stands. Your brother deserves that chance regardless of our history, and the foundation needs your perspective more than ever. And us? The question was direct, classic Abby. Jackson considered his answer carefully. I don't believe in coincidence, he said finally. Of all the restaurants in New York, you ended up serving my table. Of all the people I could have connected with, it was the daughter of a man whose life I affected without ever knowing it. He moved closer to her. Maybe it's the universe's way of making things right. That's a convenient way to absolve yourself, Abby challenged. I'm not looking for absolution. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. Your father's death was tragic. If my business decisions contributed to that tragedy, I can't undo it. But I can acknowledge the human cost of choices I made, thinking only about profit margins. He reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. The man I was then wouldn't have understood why that matters. The man I am now, the man you've helped me become, does. Something shifted in Abby's expression. Not forgiveness exactly, but a willingness to consider possibilities. What happens now? She asked. That depends on you, Jackson replied. I meant what I said that night. My feelings haven't changed, but I understand if yours have. Abby looked down at their joined hands. When I was 18, I swore I'd hate Jackson Pierce forever. I blamed you for everything that went wrong in our lives. She met his eyes again. But hate isn't something you can sustain when you see someone's humanity, when you watch them help your brother without judgment, when you see them transform their foundation because they actually care about making a difference. Is that a roundabout way of saying you have feelings for me too? Jackson asked, a tentative smile forming. It's a roundabout way of saying it's complicated. But she smiled too. The connection between them undeniable, despite everything. Complicated I can work with, Jackson said. I've built a career on solving complicated problems. This isn't a business deal, Jackson. No, it's much more important. He took both her hands in his. I'm not asking you to forget the past. I'm asking for a chance at a future. I need time, she said honestly, and I need to know this isn't just some cosmic balancing of accounts for you. Fair enough, he released her hands. How about we start with dinner? Not as billionaire and consultant, not as perpetrator and victim, just as Jackson and Abby. The suggestion hung between them, an offer of a fresh beginning despite their tangled history. After what seemed like an eternity, Abby nodded. Dinner. But I choose the place again. I wouldn't have it any other way. 3 months later, Jackson stood in the middle of an empty warehouse in Williamsburg, Abby by his side. Contractors moved around them, taking measurements and discussing renovations. "You're sure about this?" Abby asked, watching his face carefully. "Completely," Jackson replied. "The Matthews Center for Arts Education, a place where talent meets opportunity, regardless of zip code or family income." The journey to this moment had not been easy. Their relationship had developed slowly, each step forward accompanied by honest conversations about their past, present, and possible future together. Daniel was 4 months sober now, participating in the center's planning while continuing his recovery. The warehouse would become a state-of-the-art facility, offering free arts education to underprivileged youth, with programs extending into career development and mental health support. It would be the first of many such centers across the country, funded by a new division of the Pierce Foundation, but operated independently under Abby's direction. "My father would have approved," Abby said softly, looking around the space. "He always believed education was the great equalizer." "Tell me more about him," Jackson said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. These conversations had become a ritual between them, Abby sharing memories of her father, humanizing the man who had once been just a name on a spreadsheet to Jackson. "He taught me to see beauty in unexpected places," she said, leaning into him, "to look beyond surfaces. I think that's why I became an art teacher." "He sounds like a remarkable man." He was, flawed, like all of us, but remarkable in his way. She turned to face him. "He would have liked the man you've become." The words meant more to Jackson than any business accolade ever had. In the months since Abby's revelation, he had reconsidered every aspect of how he conducted business, implementing policies that recognized the human impact of corporate decisions. His board wasn't entirely pleased, but Jackson was past caring about their approval. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. A key. Abby took it, raising an eyebrow questioningly. "To the center. We're months from completion." "To my house in the Berkshires," Jackson clarified. "I thought maybe this weekend, if you're free, we could go there together, just us." It was a significant step. They had been taking things slowly, building trust alongside affection. Neither had pushed for more until they were ready. Abby studied the key in her palm, then closed her fingers around it. "I'd like that." As they walked through the space that would become their shared legacy, Jackson reflected on the strange path that had brought them together. A chance meeting that wasn't chance at all. A connection forged through conflict and healing. "What are you thinking about?" Abby asked, noticing his expression. "How sometimes the things that seem to break us actually rebuild us into something better," he replied. "If I hadn't met you, I'd still be that man at Bellini's, successful but empty." "You changed everything. We changed each other," Abby corrected. "That's how it's supposed to work." Outside, as they stepped into the bright spring afternoon, Daniel was waiting by the car. He looked healthier than Jackson had ever seen him, clear-eyed and purposeful. The architectural plans for the center were his first professional project since beginning recovery. "Well?" he asked anxiously. "What do you think of the space?" "It's perfect," Abby assured him, embracing her brother. As Jackson watched them, he felt a profound sense of rightness. This unusual family they were building, bound not by blood but by choice, by forgiveness, by a shared vision for repairing what had been broken, was more meaningful than all his previous achievements combined. Later that evening, as he and Abby walked along the Brooklyn waterfront, the Manhattan skyline glittering across the river, Jackson stopped and turned to her. "I know we agreed to take things slowly," he said, "and we can continue at whatever pace feels right, but I need you to know I love you, Abby Matthews. Not despite our history, but including it, every complicated, messy, beautiful part of it." Abby looked up at him, the wariness that had characterized their early interactions long gone. In its place was something Jackson had never expected to find at this stage of his life: partnership, understanding, home. "I love you too," she said simply. "Enough to believe we can build something meaningful from broken pieces." As they continued their walk, planning their weekend in the Berkshires and the future beyond, Jackson reflected that the exhausted billionaire who had sat at Bellini's that fateful night could never have imagined where a waitress with remarkable eyes would lead him, to a life measured not in acquisitions and assets, but in second chances and new beginnings.